Well, we started the process then of selecting a director, executive director. We had to also try to select a place to move to, and we had several opportunities either to go in with the home builders or we go in with a couple of different organizations, and several lobbyists contact us and whether we should hire a lobbyist and we're not worry about an executive director for a while, but we finally decided that in the interviewing process that Bill McKenzie was one of our candidates, and he had a good background with the State Board of Forestry and such, but I think during his term as executive director, we got bottled up in the legislative process, and that could be a full-time job for a person. It has to be pretty well paid to spend all the time in the legislature, and so I think that brought about some crises then that we finally had to decide that we better stick to the volunteer legislative process and try to get somebody to get our affairs in order and try to live within a budget for what limited funds we had. And so we've gone through two different selection processes for an executive director of this organization during my time, and I think that was probably the learning experience as well as some frustrations. But I admire Eileen's tenure and being able to stay with it too, because I think that it'd be awful easy in an organization like this just to throw your hands up and say the heck with it, because you don't think that people care. And you're representing a large number of people, but I think that when it comes right down to the people that get involved, 10% is generally the magic number. That it's less than 10% of any membership, whether it's in a church or fraternal organization or anything else, that are actually actively involved.
I think that's true. Yeah, you can't expect too much more than 10%. It'd be nice, but it's
well,
very
it'd be
difficult.
nice if we had 5,000 members, and if we had 500, it would be actively involved. But I think when we were working, probably with about 1,500 members, and we didn't have a good count on that because the way the dues process was scattered over throughout the year, and you didn't know whether somebody hadn't paid their dues or not. And we were going into trying to get everything into computer systems, and that was a headache for about 2 years with OFIC and about 3 years with our own office and trying to come up with a database that we knew that was reliable. And I think we're still working with some of that headache, but it's beginning to shake out now, and I think we've got a fairly good count on number of people, and we're getting a good annual renewal of membership now. I think that's the thing. Sometimes people got dropped out just because they forgot or were off in snowland someplace, and snowbirds that went south and got back and forgot to pay their bill, and so suddenly we dropped them.
Well, and I think at the county level we're starting to do more follow-up.
Right.
And
But it has to be done at the county level. You can't do it from a Salem office.
Yeah.
I think that's the key to most of the activities at this organization. It's still a county organization, and we work from the bottom up, and until we don't want some dictator telling us what to do on each county level, because we've got strong county chapters. We were down last night to the annual meeting for the Lane County chapter in Eugene, and I think there must have been 200 people out. It was a tremendous good turnout.
And the event we're having was what their...
It was just their annual dinner,
meeting.
and then they had a talk by an OSWA representative, and they presented awards to the Tree Farmer of the Year that was honored up at Portland at the Oregon Tree Farm program. That was a good meeting.
All right. Well, it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of hard work, and some creative thinking to get that kind of crowd out these days. We have a lot of competition,
Oh yeah. Volunteer time, it's the same people volunteering to do all the things, whether it's in lodge work or whether it's in an organization like this.
Well, Jim, everything seems to go in cycles, and right now in forestry, I say right now, but the last few years, we seem to be in a period of intense change, and we have come under some real intense public scrutiny as well as the government looking in on what we're doing. What factors would you say have precipitated the situation we now have? To me, sometimes it seems like we went wrong somewhere.
Well, I think we've gone wrong more from the federal level than any place. I think Oregon's had a long history of conservation. When I started in forestry, we had the Conservation Act that was probably not the success that should have been, but it was an effort to try to make sure that we produced another stand of trees. You had to leave 5% of the timber stand if you logged 40 acres. You left 2 acres someplace, but generally it was down the bottom of a canyon or on a stream side someplace where it didn't do the job of reforesting, or you left 2 trees per acre. Well, the 2 trees that were selected per acre weren't always the best seed trees either. So that, but that was it was an effort towards conservation, and it was in existence, I think, for about 20 years until the first Forest Practices Act was passed. And that act, I think, took care of it, made sure that there had to be some reforestation effort done then, and most of the people planted, but there was some aerial seeding and a few other things. I worked for an individual in 1952 that was buying land for less than $50 an acre. He bought a lot of land for $1 an acre from time of the Depression years on. And it was hard to convince him that I should spend money either aerial seeding or planting trees. He said, for $50 an acre, I can go out and buy another 5 or 10 acres of land. Why worry about reforesting it? And that was the thinking, I think, of a lot of people, and then thought nature probably did it, you know. And there's lots of places in the country still people think that natural regeneration is the way to go, and it probably would work in hardwood stands in the lake states and some of the New England states. It doesn't always perpetuate the best species, but you're going to end up with a forest again of hardwoods. But in our coniferous stands, it's hard to regenerate the best trees that grow here, and so planting is the key to success. And that was my job for about 15 years of this tree farm that I managed, was rehabilitating about 35,000 acres of land that was covered with hardwoods because of the activities that had gone on for about 50 years prior to the time we acquired them. And so, but I think the federal policy, you know, the elimination of 2,4,5-T created, that was one of the best brush control things we had on the coast. And of course, that's kind of the starting of the anti-movement in forestry then, because a lot of people were moving out into the forest during the 60s that were, I was amazed in where we bought our tree farm that up the road about 2 miles, a hippie commune was in style there, and all of the individuals I ever met with that thing were all either doctorates or master's degrees from college dropouts. And they just got tired of society, and I guess, and moved out to places like that. And there's still 2 of them left out there, and they run a forest nursery now. So it's kind of interesting to see how that generated. But my wife and I thought with our kids in high school that there might be problems growing out that close to a situation like that. But I think every one of our kids wanted to move to the city after they saw what these kids were doing, living like. So. But I think most of the problems, though, have originated, and I know they have in recent years, from federal legislation. You know that we've passed all kinds of acts that we can't really live with. We're going to preserve everything on this planet, you know, but the human part of the equation hasn't been addressed yet. And I can see right now with this fish thing, if we end up declaring a endangered species out of either steelhead or the coho salmon, we're going to be right back where we were with streamside buffers. There won't be 300 feet of timber left on any stream in the state of Oregon if any private landowner has a chance to get in there and get it out, because that is a taking, and it's not a taking of an endangered species, a taking of my wealth or your wealth or somebody else's wealth. And so far this country, I thought, considered that as having to be compensated for under our Constitution. We're gonna direct that one of these days, and we're gonna have to address how much you can take and still not compensate a landowner.
Well, 300 feet is quite a lot, especially
Well,
on a small holding.
I wanted to show you my tree farm today if we have time, because I own a mile of stream frontage, and it's hardly over 300 feet wide any place. And I think I would lose the whole tree farm. And that's probably the kind of tree farm that you're going to have to take to court to prove that you've lost everything. And it's been my kids' endeavors to get this tree farm established for over 25 years, and I still have a hard time trying to get trees to grow down close to the stream banks, but I'm going to try and do that under a couple of projects. But we passed a legislative law in the state of Oregon by Kintai bill that said if you planted a tree, you have the right to harvest it. Now, if we suddenly declare 300-foot non-touch buffers along streams, does that mean I can't cut any of the trees that I planted?
It sounds like it.
Well, I think there's
going to be a conflict there.
going to be a conflict.
Two laws
that
going
conflict, I think, has originated from some very vague laws that sounded good back in Congress, you know, that we're going to have clean water and clean air, and then how you interpret what clean water is. And, you know, I haven't yet figured out this temperature standard that we've come up with that is the thing that suddenly 900 streams in the state of Oregon are quality limited because of temperature. And I don't think in places those temperatures, you could reach them under natural conditions no matter what you did.
Yeah.
Some of those streams in eastern Oregon are going to be warm in the summertime
no matter what happens.
Yeah. They shouldn't be listed then.
Ambient temperature is going to be pretty high out there. Yeah. Well, yeah, you've touched on some really hairy situations for us, and I think it's wise that we record some of this so that people in the future maybe will look back on it.
Hopefully people someday can say that you were all wrong and then things turned out all right. But I can just, I've seen it over the years that I don't doubt that there's going to be some kind of an exclusion on clear cutting process. The National Forest System, you know, when at one time there was no limit to the clear cutting. And of course, when early days, stage cutting was the way a lot of these timber stands were cut. That you cut maybe a swath along a face of a timber stand that you owned lots of acres, and maybe you took a 200 or 300 foot strip out. And those seeded in exceptionally well, especially if those units were planned so that prevailing winds in the fall blew seed onto the area that you logged. And that's how a lot of the area in the Cascades and the Coast Range reforested so well after the early day logging. But then they got down to the National Forest ended up with some legislation that they could not cut over 20 or a 60-acre clear cut. Which wasn't bad. I mean, they can live with 60-acre clear cuts. But I've seen places, and for years, where 20 and 30-acre clear cuts were wiped out after planting by the deer population, because you were concentrating all the deer on thousands of acres in those lush areas where there's some forage for them to work on. So we found when we first started with this rehab program that we tried to create 400-acre units that we could burn the slash on, and we'd do the aerial spraying, but they were big enough that the dollars you spent on it were spread out over a lot of acres, and costs were pretty good. And it got to the point where suddenly smoke management came into style. You know, you couldn't burn on certain days, and you couldn't burn when the wind was blowing into metropolitan areas, and pretty soon we had metropolitan areas on three sides of us, and so you almost eliminated the slash burning process. And so the size of the acres of units you could burn got smaller and smaller, and the deer population, and between that and the mountain beaver population, we had tremendous failures on plantations that we'd planted. And it wasn't I think that was just because of rules and regulations that were passed.
Mhm.
Those units that we had 400 acres that you had boundaries around the deer. I can remember the Fish and Wildlife people came out and did nighttime counts on deer on those units. They didn't count as many as 10 and 15 deer per mile. And with a flashlight at night looking at these units, but most of them are right around the fringes of the unit. And so that was where you concentrated your replanting activities, or the next time you harvested a unit where you took care of the replanting then. But
Did they find, I'm asking a question I want to know
Well,
personally here, but did they find that the deer stayed pretty close to the perimeter of those areas, that they didn't go into
they didn't
the
go into
center?
the centers of there was plenty of feed for them, probably within the first 50 feet and you had a large perimeter for them to work on.
I see, all right.
And but as soon as you concentrate the deer down into 5 and 10 acres, that's the problem. You know, everybody talking about small clear cuts now is going to be the answer, but a small clear cut, you're going to have some terrible problems with the deer population.
Well, I'll get back to you later. I have a 10-acre one, and I'm worried already because we have deer and a huge herd of elk.
Well,
And I understand that they have a way of wrapping the tongue right around a new seedling, and there go all of the needles. So
we
I don't
had
know what we're going to do.
open range on our area out there for years when we first started, and that was I've learned to live with cattlemen because I thought, well, I bought this place, it was a stump ranch, and I better run some cows to at least see if I can pay the taxes on it. And I wanted the kids to see what raising animals was like, and so we did have our cattle. But the neighbors' cows from miles around, there's a couple of farmers that sold off all the thousands of acres they had, and they kept about 40 acres, but they still ran as many cows as they did when they had the 1,000 acres. And they were running up and down the county roads, and you couldn't keep a fence up if you wanted to do. And a time or two, the bulls got in with my cows, and so I never could even keep a purebred herd of cows. So it was just one frustration after another, you know. And I finally decided maybe growing trees is what I should be trying to do. But
Yeah.
I think I say someplace in my letter to you there that I know a lot of attorneys that don't have a will, and I know most foresters are probably the poorest tree farmers that you have because their dedication to plant trees is great, but they don't have time to manage them.
It does take a lot of time, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, I think you've given me a wonderful answer to all of that. Given the present attitude toward forestry, what do you predict for small woodlands forestry here in the Northwest in the next 10 or 20 years? If we, and maybe we dare to look even beyond that. I don't know. It's kind of crystal ball time. What are you predicting?
Well, I hope some sanity comes back into the population someday to realize that we can grow trees in our backyard and not scalp trees off of the rest of the planet to provide the needs that we don't sell trees or sell lumber to people that don't need it. We sell it to the people that want to buy it. And so if they didn't want to buy it, you probably wouldn't grow a tree and most of these sawmills would be someplace else. And I can see in California that small acreages aren't going to be practicing forestry anymore. There's no way under the present California system that a 40-acre landowner can afford the cost to harvest any timber. He's got to hire a licensed forester, he's got to hire licensed geologists and archaeologists and fish and wildlife biologists, and they write a plan that costs them $10,000 or $15,000, and they probably can't get $10,000 or $15,000 worth of timber off the property. So that I think they've eliminated that type of an ownership for anything other than recreational use. And the people that are buying those properties are suddenly moving to Oregon with the same ideas. They can buy 30 or 40 acres or 80 acres and build a $500,000 house on it, probably pay for it with a house they sold in California, and they're going to have a private little recreation area someplace. And if we can't convince those people that growing trees along with that house is a viable option, just like buying stocks and bonds, I think you can sit down and pencil out, that 30 or 40 acres of timber will produce a nest egg in about 40 years that will put a youngster through school, or will pay for a retirement program for somebody, or pay for some massive hospital bills or anything else. But that is probably the key that small Woodlands have got to convince that 40,000 people, not just the 2 or 3 or 4,000 we have in small Woodlands, that the investment in property is, for a home site, is for one thing, but also that you can manage trees right up almost to the edge of the house. I had experience working with a scout camp down in Lane County that we horse logged to do a thinning, but the thinning was needed because the trees were lifting the roofs off the cabins on the property, because they built these cabins close, and then the trees kept growing, and pretty soon the trees are right up against the roof. And so using jacks to make sure the tree fell in the right direction, and use horse logging, low stumps, and when they got through, the next summer we went back in there, you couldn't tell if they'd been logged. And that can be done next to a house, or it can be done next to any stream side buffer or anything else. And it's the way that we've got to manage our land.
Well, I think once again that's a good answer, and I hope that we do make that kind of an impact on the public, that they will take to heart the growing of trees and suddenly see us as ambassadors for trees rather than the evil folks that cut them down.
Well, our land use laws, I think have been good for most aspects. I've got 2 daughters living in Washington, and have seen the California sprawl, that unbridled cutting up of land. I'm a surveyor,
Yes, I know.
and that was a hobby with me. I got my license in 1952, and I worked for a consulting engineer, and then it's just been a good background for me for. In fact, if I was recommending anything for kids, that I liked trigonometry when I was in high school, and I had a teacher that just drilled the trigonometry. Well, that was the one thing I found in the Navy as a navigator was the most essential thing I ever learned. And when you get out, you find out suddenly that's the background of all surveying, so that there's things that you pick up as you go along. But I've seen the way they've cut up into these little 5 and 10 acre parcels in the state of Washington, that it does make a tremendously impossible situation for managing for forest land. And more and more you see it in the urban areas around Portland, where the trees blowing down on houses, and everybody wants to just clear enough land to put the house in, but they don't want to cut any trees, and then suddenly nature does the selection for them, and there soon will be a big clear cut around every subdivision in the state of Oregon. If it was just like this landslide bill we have, we'd have passed that law last session that anybody that has trees in a subdivision are going to have to cut those trees to get rid of the hazard. Well, we're going to stop cutting trees on areas now to keep trees from falling on people, and it's just the opposite thinking that goes on. But I think that our land use laws I still think a person should have the right to build a house on 40 acres of land. And I think an acre out of that 40 acres can be located, that's the key to it. It's got to be located in a place where it doesn't create problems for an industrial ownership that might be adjacent to it. It's got to be close to fire access for fire departments. And it should be where utilities don't have to run 3 miles of telephone lines or power lines and things. People are buying land and then building a house out in the middle of 80 and 160 acres isn't good, I don't think. But I've seen quite a bit of that going on. But I've done management plans for people that can build on a 40 acre parcel and still with 35 or maybe 38 acres of timberland, and manage that timberland, living right there, will have a tremendous value in about 40 years.
Well, moving on now, while we still have some tape left on this reel, who are the people that you would name to your personal list of outstanding woodland owner-managers? And include in that list, if you will, who are the people that have influenced your thinking about forestry?
Well, it's a long list, and I guess...
Well, maybe you can give me your top 10 or something.
I'll give you a few. I worked with Bert Udell and Dick Smith was a consulting forester out of, worked for Mason, Bruce and Yard at one time. And his son Mark now runs Timberland Management, I think it is, with Jim Wick and
okay.
and
Dan Green.
Dan Green. Excellent people. And but because of Dick Smith's philosophy and Bert's being an industrial forester, I was practicing industrial forestry, you know, and I had some very astute arguments, I think, with those individuals about this individual tree selection and trying to maintain a stand that you could selectively log the larger trees out. And I always felt that, well, maybe the consulting forester was looking at that so he can make sure he got enough income out of the harvest. That most of the harvests we did with small understory thinnings were probably not profitable, and that's the reason a lot of industrial lands didn't do any thinning program. They dropped their thinning programs because it cost too much. But those are Bert Udell and Dick Smith. I think had and I can see the merit in some of the things they're doing, and it may be a way we can still practice forestry without clear cuts. Although I think that eventually you have to face a clear cut, whether it's a disaster creates it or whether the trees just rot and fall down or something like that. I think you're going to end up having to establish a stand again. So I hope we don't lose that. When I first started in small woodlands, though, I packed my little 6-month-old daughter on my back, which is now carried as 30, on Wendell Harmon's tree farm.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really impressed with the effort and the things that he'd done on his properties. And I got to know him. We even bought his original homestead he acquired early on in the century down in Lincoln County. Publisher's Paper Company bought that piece of land, and I had Wendell come down one day and wander around with me and tell me a little bit about it. And so his thinking on poles and piling, though, really got me excited about some of the things you could do with stands of timber. There's a lot of other people, though, from Lee Hunt, his work with exotic species and things, and I've been on his tree farm. Probably back early on in my education, T.J. Starker was the instrumental in the thinking of most young foresters that come out of Oregon State that you should buy a piece of land, you know, if you're going to practice forestry. And he kept convincing people that was one of the better investments you can do with your spare money, and most of us didn't have spare money to do it with, but fortunately some of us did have foresight to see that he was right. My tree farm came about because I bought a piece of tax land that was 4 acres. I don't think anybody else knew where it was, and I spent the time to research it and found out I had about 300 feet of lake frontage on it. And I finally ended up with some value so high that the assessor thought it was worth that I couldn't build a house on it, so I traded it for a tree farm. And I bought a small 40-acre parcel from Bert Udell one time today. And so those people have all influenced my thinking, I think. And gosh, if you start naming off the other 150 people, you know, that you think that probably there's just lots of them in the forestry profession. Fraternity brother of mine is John Bell here that he and I worked together for a summer down in Southern Oregon, and he's one of the key mensurationists in the country. He goes all over the world practically giving seminars on timber cruising and techniques. Put on aerial photograph courses here at the college for years. Law, you meet millions of people, and I guess that's the thing that I've found with small woodlands. I learn something on every trip I go on. You can't quit learning.
Somebody always has a new wrinkle, or you see something in a new way. I think that's true. Well, shall we return to maybe your personal forestry here in another way? What objective do you have then for your tree farm, and are you focused on forest or Christmas trees? Probably forest trees.
Yeah,
Or any alternative products?
I really have enjoyed on field tours, you know, with people that have the benefit of working with alternative products, and I've seen that end of it that I would like to do sometime. I don't think I'll have time in my lifetime to develop that, but I'm really trying to establish a timber stand on 40 acres of land is what I'm doing, and I'll probably be 65 before I get through with it, the acres. I've got 25 acres still in pasture. I'm going to convert at least 15 more of that here in the next year or two, and quite a bit of that stream frontage. So
Are you sure, Jim, you want to do this?
Mixed emotion. Well, I haven't. And that's the thing where I have planted. I've tried to stay this 50 feet away from the stream, but I just figured that there's no sense in me. If they want trees there, somebody else is going to have to put them there someday. Yeah. But I've almost changed my thinking on that a little bit. And looking around Lincoln County, I see some redwoods, both the giant redwood, have to also try to select a place to move to, and we had several opportunities. Either coastal redwood, you have pretty poor results in reforesting with redwoods, but I have planted some areas, and we've got about 15-year-old redwoods growing on a place that's real close to the bay in Newport. And I've seen some redwoods, that coastal redwood at Eddyville and a couple other places where individual trees were undoubtedly planted by homesteaders and must be 100 to 120 years old, and they're up to 6 foot in diameter. The coastal red, the Sequoia gigantea from the Sierras, there's places in the coast there that there's some 6 to 8 foot redwoods that had to be planted by early settlers. And I begin to wonder whether, if we need large woody debris in streams and basal area to produce that we should be planting some of these redwoods on stream frontages. I'm going to do that. And I think I can produce the basal area with the state law. They'll probably change the law then next week, and they'll require 3 times as much basal area, but I think I could produce a lot quicker than trying to grow some other species along the stream frontage. And probably will plant fir that I can maybe take the fir out as time goes on a limited scale, unless we go to a total non-touch buffer. I hope the state stays with the management ability on riparian areas. I for the life of me can't think in a 300-foot strip that we're supposed to be leaving the length of 2 trees that can fall in the stream. Well, the second tree is never going to fall in the stream. And if you're leaving it to the chance of nature, maybe none of them will ever fall in the stream. That if a tree in the stream is necessary, let's pick one and take it down there and put it in the stream. You know, we can do things with the management regimes and the equipment we have that evidently, you know, for years we couldn't run tractors and excavators into the stream without getting a violation of the Forest Practices Act. But now if we have to provide some fish habitat, you can take the excavator right down and walk in the stream, and people are clapping their hands and saying that's the best thing for the fish. So we've got to keep the ability to manage every acre we have. If we don't, and manage it for all the uses, including some timber production.
We might not have houses to live in if we don't.
Maybe back to my tree farm. I've been trying to convert from an old stump ranch. That's what it was. There was over 1,000 acres in the property, and I couldn't compete with my competitor, my employer, by buying the timberland, but I talked my boss into letting me buy the vacant land that didn't have any trees growing on it. So there was about 75 acres of pasture and just stumps and blackberries, and I've been working with that, trying to get it back into a timber stand.
So how many years now have you been working on this project?
About 25 years.
About 25 years.
I've got some trees that are 25 years, the first planting we did. And I should have been out pruning on them years ago, but I'm starting to, that's one of the things I'm going to do this year, is at least prune some crop trees. And up until about the last couple of years, I couldn't even get around underneath the trees because of the blackberries. And so the blackberries now are being shaded out by the trees, so maybe I'll be able to get around and be able to tally and hug a couple of them and see what they what they have.
So So you just had to wait for the blackberries to kind of be
Well,
out,
I've
for
tried,
lack of light?
I've tried spraying, you know, I've sprayed blackberries. You have to have about a 3-year program of just continual spraying. And I couldn't put that much time into it. And so I finally decided that I've seen places where we planted trees and finally the blackberries are crowded out. And I let nature take care of that part of it for me. But it has hindered my doing a lot of things I should have been doing.
I had to ask that question because I have a blackberry patch that seems to be growing out and out and out. And
Well,
I'm beginning to wonder what it's going to take to get rid of it.
I had a lady in Walport that I did some consulting work for and did some surveying. And she was adamant that she wasn't going to use chemicals on blackberries. She bought this little 5-acre parcel down there, and the first year she planted trees on it, and the next year the blackberries are taller than the trees were. So she was out there cutting every blackberry down with a pair of clippers. And about the second year, I told her, well, you know, Roundup and a couple of these chemicals will do a pretty good job on the grasses. And maybe if you add a little bit of Garlon with it, you might be able to get rid of those blackberries. And she said, oh, no, I'm adamant. I don't use chemicals. And about the third year, she bought a backpack sprayer, and she was out there spraying blackberries. And I think that's all it takes to convince somebody that's just totally an anti-herbicide individual that they should have a blackberry patch to take care of.
Yeah, and mine is huge. And in fact, it was a blackberry patch when I was a little kid, and I'm not going to tell you how many years that's been, but it's been a long time, and it's beginning to take off. So I know I'm going to be out there with something. I've considered, you know, a bulldozer maybe first.
Well, that's the only way you can get into some of these stands.
I couldn't begin to. You could spray around the edge and just kill it and keep moving in, I suppose. But we're also talking about just taking the skidder and crunching right into the middle and then doing some spraying out from that. But I hope the skidder doesn't die because we'd never get out. Anyway, I guess my last question for you is, if you had all day today to spend on your tree farm, what would you choose to do?
Well, the last 2 times I've been out to the tree farm, I think probably what I would do, I'd stand there and look a little bit at some of that streamside buffer and wondering what can I do to, I've got to get rid of grass competition, the first thing. And there's places that erosion along the stream banks, the alders keep falling into the creek, and I finally got a biologist out here about a month ago and started looking at some of this. I'm going to I'm on a watershed council in the mid-coast area, and so I think the key to getting people to respond to some of the needs where there is some stream restoration I like to call them stream enhancement, because I haven't done anything to that stream. I don't think that maybe the cows walking down to the creek and getting a drink out of it might have created a little erosion, but it's not the erosion I see from just natural trees falling and beavers undermining the stream bank, and so I've lost quite a bit of land and soil just from natural causes. And so I wanted some expertise to tell me what can I do to stop that. And then I think I will try to plant some riparian areas. I may even fence a couple of areas. I've had some sheep on the property for the last few years just to keep the grass down on that 25 acres that we have. And I think I'd like to keep them a little on the higher ground and try to get that riparian area back a little bit better. As the farmers all cleared everything right to the stream banks when these early homesteads. If that may be a restoration then from
that point of view.
But I think it's an enhancement myself, and I'm not too sure though that someday somebody looking at that with big trees growing and the shade around the house may decide they need more sunlight in there, and they'll probably want to cut all the trees down again. That's kind of a humorous thing that I look back on at one of the early properties we bought in the Harlan area south of Burnt Woods, between here and Newport. It was owned by a big cattle rancher that lives south of Corvallis, and he spent his whole lifetime clearing stumps on about 200 acres of that property so he could run cows out there. And as soon as the company bought it, we ended up stirring it up and planting trees on it. And he's been mad at me ever since, that his whole lifetime endeavors
Wiped
are
out.
wiped out with trees growing back out there again. I told him one time, I said that if cattle become more valuable than trees, I says somebody's going to clear that thing off just like you did again, and we'll start this circle over again. So I think that'll happen even with my tree farm out there. That somebody, I want to see trees growing around on it, but somebody will probably want to have a horse and a cow again someday, and they'll probably clear 5 acres to have some pasture land. But I think my day, if I had it out there, it would be spent in trying to get more trees growing on what I've got there.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, I think you're right about the cycle thing, because I was just thinking of my own place, and yeah, my grandfather spent a lot of time, and his father before him, clearing acreage, and we're going back and planting trees on it
Well,
now.
sure.
You know.
It's a natural cycle, I think. And early homesteaders had to have a place to live. They had to have something to eat,
Yeah.
and it required sunlight. And so the first thing they did was to create an opening and
Uh-huh.
try to get a garden growing of some kind or another, and get a few animals that they could eat on, and hopefully they could find enough. Out in our country, it was chittenden bark and pickin fern and a few other mosses and things that they existed on for years. Every 160 acres in Lincoln County was a homestead at one time. It wasn't a massive big natural forest out there. You know, that these homesteaders back in the turn of the century and on created these big openings we had, and for years up until the early 50s. In February, when these kids were out lighting fern hillsides and burning them off. One of the people that I've known over the years is Hardy Glasscock, was executive director for the Society of American Foresters for a number of years in Washington, D.C., but his dad and family have a homestead, or a property they bought in 1942 out by Eddyville. And that property, even after they moved out there in 42, was burnt a couple of different times by neighbors. They had a heck of a time stopping these neighbors from burning these fern hillsides off, because raising goats at that time was, mohair goat was one of the prize crops you could raise on your property, you know. And we've got all kinds of goat creeks and goat ridges and things in our country just because that's the way that people made a living.
Oh, well, maybe one of these days we'll get back to goats even, but I hope not in my lifetime.
Well, I got a neighbor where we live in Toledo now that
I don't wanna raise
has a
goats.
couple of little pygmy goats. They're kind of cute, but
Yeah.
they don't serve much function other than to keep. I think they do take care of the blackberries. That's
Oh.
one thing. If I get 10 acres and 10 goats, well, you can probably get rid of the blackberries after a while.
Well, maybe I will have to get a goat or two to take care of my blackberries. Well, I want to thank you, Jim. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the tape? Any other thoughts that you had? You thought we should
Well,
record for all posterity here?
I just hope that Small Woodlands carries on, and I know that if you look at all of the past presidents and our ages, well, we're not going to be too long that we're going to be around to influence things, and so we got to get a lot of younger generation involved. I do hope that we have that involvement.
Well, I remember Eileen commenting on that last year. You know,
Yeah.
I'd sure like to see a lot more of the so-called younger generation, whatever that is, out at our annual meetings. But
Well, I saw
I
quite
guess
a
it will
number
come.
in Eugene last night, and
Good.
I've noticed there are a lot of small ownerships owned by younger couples, but their whole life is tied up in raising kids and running the school functions, and I don't know, you can't get them involved, I don't think, in the active management of the Small Woodlands but association, but I think you can get them involved in doing things on their land and probably still being a member of Small Woodlands, and those are the people we have to reach. Most of them have bought their piece of property for a place to live.
yes, and maybe that will just become our function. You know, as people get older and they don't have so many demands, you know, they may be the ones that will have to do a lot of the organizational things.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to live with the reality that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thanks, Jim, for making the trip over here to Corvallis today to talk to me and tell me some stories from the past and give me some specifics here. whoever hears this tape in the future, I'm sure is going to appreciate your efforts, and I'll be taking excerpts from this to write a little piece about you to put in our OSWA scrapbook. So
Yeah, very good.
I truly appreciate it. You are a member of an outstanding group, because I've talked to now and interviewed so many of the past presidents that I have decided this was a very privileged assignment that Bill McKinsey gave me a number of years ago. And I've gotten a good education just from talking to you, but I've been
That's good.
really impressed by the talents and the insight that all these presidents have had. Everyone has been different.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know,
Yeah,
each one
yeah.
had his personality that he brought to the project. But all in all, you know, you put it all together, and it's just been a wealth that has come to the organization in the contribution of all these presidents. So I thank you on behalf of the organization for those years that you've given us, and it's more than your 4 years as a president. That was one thing, but I know you've helped us for many years in other ways, and I hope you continue to do so.
Kind of interesting. Yesterday I went to a Farm Bureau meeting, legislative meeting, of course,
Yes?
and suddenly here's 4 past presidents of OSWA sitting at that table.
Huh.
They had Casey Vanetta and Lee Hunt and Bob Kintai and myself,
Uh-huh.
along with a number of forest land owners that are members of the Farm Bureau, but
Oh.
also OSWA members.
Uh-huh.
Great connection there. I think our offices being in the Farm Bureau are a plus for us.
That's
Yeah.
a good place for us.
Yeah.
Well, it does look like it's a concentration of like-minded kinds of people who have their ties to the land and the things that grow in the land. And I was pleased to see that the new home there in Salem for our organization did share space in the building, share the building with other people of that type. Well, thanks, Jim, and I guess we'll conclude our recording here.
Very good.